Hello, good morning. Welcome to today's webinar. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about the COVID-19 vaccine, some facts and information pertaining to it, along with our local health experts. My name is Tom Pukish. I'm the president of the Wayne Economic Development Council, and along with our partners, the Worcester Area Chamber of Commerce and the Orrville Area Chamber of Commerce, we're coming together to bring you this webinar. Our goal is always to bring pertinent information to our local businesses and community leaders. And we hope that you'll enjoy today's session as we kind of dive into some of the information that's wrapped around the vaccine and the rollout. So today we have a great panel ahead of us here, and I'm going to introduce them quickly, and then we'll get started in today's session. Who we have with us today, we have Dr. Arthur. He's pulmonary and critical care medicine from Worcester Community Hospital. We have Dr. Leininger, infectious disease specialist representing also from Worcester Community Hospital. Amy Barsek, pharmacy clinical manager from Worcester Community Hospital, along with Dr. Svoboda, hospitalist in internal medicine from Orrville Altman Hospital. And also with us, we have Nicholas Cascarelli, our health commissioner. So great panel today, and we're going to talk a lot about some of the information, once again, wrapped around the vaccine. Today's webinar is geared towards the questions that we asked and we received from our local business community. So all of the panel is going to be kind of touching on some of those questions, and I'll be facilitating this the best I can to try to address everybody's questions. If we do get through all the questions, and if there is opportunity to take some of your questions live, there is either a chat box or a question box that feel free to fill that out and send it in, and we will try to address it today. If not, what we're going to do is assemble as many questions as we can, and we're going to kick these back out to our member investors. So with that, we're going to get started. I asked Nick from our health commissioner to get us started and just to talk a little bit about the rollout and the process and what's been going on, and kind of give us a rundown on who's getting vaccinated and what we should expect here in the future. So Nick, thank you.
Good morning, everyone. So vaccine rollout started last month, about the middle towards the end of the month. It started with our nursing homes, the residents and staff at those nursing homes, and then that was part of what was referred to as Phase 1A. Also in Phase 1A is healthcare workers, those personnel who are routinely involved in the care of COVID-19 patients. People that live in congregate settings, especially those with developmental disabilities or mental health disorders or substance use disorders. Residents and staff of Ohio Veterans Hospitals, which obviously isn't necessarily, but that's also part of the group, but not necessarily part of Wayne County. And then our EMS responders were also included in that 1A. So 1A, for the most part, it is done. I mean, we still have some agencies that were late registrants, and our hospital partners are done with the pieces and parts that they did in terms of getting their staff vaccinated, and some physician offices who are affiliated with the hospital systems. And they also were very helpful in helping us backfill some of those other entities within 1A. We still do have some remaining, and obviously we're going to work those in if we get and as we get additional vaccine. But now our focus has shifted to 1B, which 1B, as you know, is primarily folks who are 65 and older, but also folks with certain severe congenital developmental types of conditions, and schools, K-12. So right now, this week, we have vaccinated, the group was 75 and up, 80 and up was last week. The governor is having us going in 5-year increments. I can tell you that we've not gotten to all the 80-year-olds in Wayne County. We've not gotten to all the 75-year-olds. And even as we move forward into 70-year-olds next week and then 65 the week after, there is a vaccine shortage. There definitely, so as far as extra doses laying out there around, there aren't any. So one of the things that we did at the outset of phase 1B is the health department put together a registry where folks who are 65 and older can sign up. And our hospitals are also getting an allotment each week. So we are sharing that registry and those registrants with our 2 hospitals who've been very good partners throughout the pandemic, but especially now as we kick in and we're able to go on a little offense here and do some vaccine distribution. The Mark's Pharmacy and Discount Drug Mart are also getting allotments to get the elderly population. They kind of have their own processes in place. So we obviously let folks know that those are other places that they can get the vaccine, but they are not part of the registry that's on our website. So just to kind of let you know how that's kind of rolling out. Certainly invited them to be a part of that process, but obviously they're part of a larger corporate structure. So that's kind of how it's rolled out. Just to kind of give you some numbers, we've had a little under 5,200 people have at least gotten their first dose in Wayne County, which is about 4.5% of the population. So as far as future groups, that's, in my contacts with the Ohio Department of Health, they're still kind of figuring that out. I personally would like to see more vaccine, as if we're going to be rolling out even more groups and more providers of the vaccine. I'd like to see a larger distribution to do that. As I said, we still have some phase 1A that we're still trying to fit in somewhere. And the other piece to phase 1B is working with those with severe congenital and developmental and early onset medical issues. We're working with the local DD board is coordinating that with us to try to get those folks vaccinated. And as far as the schools, the Educational Service Center, so Tri-County ESC, is doing a lot of the coordination on that end to basically each school district picks a provider. So it could be the health department, could be the hospital, it could be the hospital systems, or some of the pharmacy providers, which I think is pretty evenly spread throughout. And some schools actually use Akron Children's Hospital for school nursing. So I think the schools that have that relationship already, so I believe Akron Children's will probably be doing those schools. As far as, I don't believe our Wayne County schools are going to start next week. It does not look like that. So, but somewhere in the next 4 or 5 weeks here, hopefully our school staffs will also be vaccinated.
So Nick, you referenced that the rollout is kind of slower than what you had expected and or hoped for. Are you hearing anything as far as that momentum starting to pick up?
I've not heard anything definitive. I do think a big driver, though, will be if Johnson & Johnson's, and certainly the other panelists can chime in on this too. They may even have more knowledge than I do, but if they get their emergency use authorization, which I believe is supposed to be February or March at some point, that can certainly impact how well, an increase in effectively an increase in vaccine if we actually have another a vaccine maker. So.
Okay. And if they need, if people need more information as far as or have questions or concerns about where to go and who to get it from, they can contact the health department via their website. Okay.
Yeah, and then there was a question in the chat real quick, and I'll just, if obviously we had 15,000 registrants, and we've not gotten 15,000 vaccines. So you can call our office if you want to make sure that you're registered. Either way, you will be notified by either the hospitals or by us when a vaccine dose is available to you. So I did see that in the chat real quick. So our number is 330-264-9590. And they can check the registry. Somebody can check the registry for you if you're concerned.
Okay, great. All right, thank you. And please, please stay on board because we'll probably have a few questions later. So I asked Amy to give us kind of a rundown. A lot of the questions and comments that were coming in were wrapped around the effectiveness and the safety of the vaccine. And so I asked Amy if you could kind of share with us kind of where we are and how we got here, and just kind of an overview with that.
Good morning. Thanks for having me. So yeah, I was asked to give sort of a 50,000-foot view of where we are, and three really important questions. What do we have available for vaccines? How effective are they, and are they safe? So currently we have 2 vaccines available to us. I think we're all used to hearing about the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine. The good news is in just the last 24 hours, a company called Novavax released some data last night. It's unclear when they may apply for emergency use authorization. However, that's a promising sign. Johnson & Johnson actually just released phase 3 data within the last 2 hours. It literally came out this morning. And they signaled their intention is to apply for emergency use authorization next week through the FDA. And so we could be within a couple weeks of having at least 1 additional vaccine, which is great news. One of the questions that came up that was submitted in advance was this issue of mRNA technology. And what does that mean? It's lingo that's being thrown around a lot, and without really understanding what that means, it's difficult for people to know how these vaccines work and if they can find them trustworthy. So I'm going to share a slide with you. And Tom, if you could help me out and just let me know if there's any issue with not being able to see my screen. Well, it seems as if there is, huh? There we go.
Yep, there we go.
Okay. Well, this isn't going to be in the exact same mode, but that's okay. We'll be able to get the picture here. So everybody recognizes this guy up in the corner of the screen. Everybody knows who that is now without being told. This, of course, is the SARS-CoV-2 virus. This is the virus that causes COVID-19, and these little spikes that stick out all over it are called spike proteins. So what these vaccines have done is really taken advantage of some cool technology where we can take the genetic information that tells this virus how to make that protein, and we can just take that little piece of information, and they pulled it out and they wrapped it up literally in a little globule of lipids or fat. And so what these vaccines are basically the instructions for how to make that protein called the spike protein. And that's what's actually injected in the form of the vaccine. So if we could zoom in on what's actually going on there, however, what happens after it's actually injected is that mRNA is taken up by our cells, and it gives instructions on how to make that protein. So our cells read those instructions and start making that spike protein. So when our body starts seeing that spike protein appearing on some of our cells, antibodies get formed. And antibodies look at that and say, hey, these are not supposed to be here, and the immune system gets all revved up. So this is really important because what it does is it teaches our bodies how to respond to the actual virus should we ever encounter it in the future without ever having been exposed to the virus at all, just by giving our cells the instructions on how to make that spike protein. So a couple things I do want to point out. There's been concern that mRNA technology is new. Well, it's kind of true and false. It's new to us, in that these are the first vaccines that have come to market using mRNA technology, but they are not new. mRNA technologies have been studied for more than 2 decades now, and there was a lot of research done with mRNA vaccines in the past. For instance, Zika vaccines. There just hasn't been a need to bring them to market. It is important to realize that this mRNA does not interact with our own DNA in any way. One of the misconceptions or rumors out there was that because they were mRNA vaccines, they could somehow interact or alter with our own native DNA. This mRNA gets quickly broken down as soon as it gives us the instructions and teaches us how to make that spike protein. It's unstable enough that we have to wrap it up in these little lipid cells to even inject it, so it doesn't hang around. So the next question people want to know is, do these vaccines work? How effective are they? And, you know, you've heard numbers around 95% effective, and that sounds great, but it's a little bit abstract in terms of what does that actually mean for me in my decision for taking the vaccine. So I just wanted to show you what 95% effective actually means, what came out of these studies. So, you know, in the blue boxes here, we have the outcomes from the Pfizer study. In the green boxes, that was the Moderna study. Now, these were big studies. The Pfizer study had more than 40,000 people. The Moderna study had more than 30,000 people. So in these studies, people were randomly assigned to either get a vaccine or to get a shot that didn't contain an active vaccine. We call that a placebo, basically a shot of saline. So what 95% effective actually means is they then followed these two groups of people over a period of months to see who would get sick. And when we say 95% effective, we're not just talking about testing positive for COVID-19. We're talking about people who actually developed symptoms and became actively infected, actually ill with the disease. And there were 95% fewer in the Pfizer study that happened to if they got the vaccine compared to the placebo shot. You can see the exact numbers are really impressive, actually. So in the Pfizer study, 8 people who got the vaccine actually developed symptomatic COVID infection compared to 162 people who received a placebo shot. And you can see the numbers for the Moderna vaccine were 11 and 185, which gave us 94% efficacy. What's maybe even more important was that it also prevented severe infection. Obviously, nobody wants to become ill with COVID-19 infection, but if we do, we certainly don't want to end up with severe COVID-19 infection, the kind of infection that could lead to needing oxygen or hospitalizations or even worse. So what we found in the studies with those numbers is people who were given the Pfizer vaccine, only 1 of them developed a severe infection compared to 9 who received the placebo shot, and those numbers were 0 and 30 for Moderna. So I'm going to stop sharing this now. The answer to is it effective is it's very effective, and that effectiveness is the kind of effectiveness that counts. It's not just about testing positive for COVID. It's about not becoming sick with COVID, and in particular, not becoming severely ill. So real briefly, the last 10,000-foot view question is, are they safe? And we're going to delve into more details with some of the questions on this. So if you still have some lingering questions, I think they're going to be answered. But when we ask if these vaccines are safe, I think we need to be careful about what we're really asking. We can ask that question in 2 ways. Do the vaccines have side effects? And do they actually have serious adverse effects? And those are 2 completely different things. Side effects are normal, expected responses. You know, when I showed you that first little cartoon, as the spike protein is being shown to our immune system, and our immune system starts saying, hey, this is not supposed to be here, and forming antibodies to go after those spike proteins, that immune response can cause symptoms, and we call those side effects. So people who get these vaccines can experience side effects as a result of the fact that their immune system is responding. I've joked with people that I'm excited if we get side effects when we get these vaccines, because then I know that my immune system is responding. So side effects with these vaccines are relatively common, but you have to put that in perspective. So it's very common for people to have a sore arm. Most people's arm will hurt after they receive this vaccine. Going down from there less commonly, some people might feel achy, their joints might hurt a little bit, they might have a headache, feel a little bit tired, and then even a lower percent of people may have experienced some mild fevers or chills. What the studies clearly showed, though, is in the vast majority of people, these things happened in the day or 2 after receiving the vaccine. They only lasted a day or 2, and it was very mild or moderate, not to the point that it interfered with the person's ability to function. So, those side effects are not necessarily a bad thing. It means that the vaccine is doing what we ask it to do. Now, in terms of are they safe, that's a completely different question than do they have side effects. And so far, these vaccines have proven to be very, very safe. There's a lot of concern sometimes expressed about the long-term follow-up of the vaccine studies. I will say these vaccine studies are going to continue to go on, and these people are going to be followed for years into the future. And when I'm asked that question, I often say, of course it would be wonderful to have 10-year follow-up data, but clearly that's not the situation that we're living in right now. So there's a few things we have to keep in mind. So when we look at vaccine safety in general, we have to realize we already know a lot about vaccine safety just because of our history of knowing about vaccinations. And what we know is vaccines are not associated with long-term toxicities. So after the side effects we've already discussed, sometimes vaccines can cause some adverse effects from the immune system being almost too revved up. You'll hear about this sometimes with the flu vaccine. People can develop some odd reactions. One is called Guillain-Barré syndrome and things like that. The immune system is a little more revved up than we want it to be. What we know with vaccinations is those things happen in the first 6 weeks after you receive a vaccine. The FDA would not even consider vaccines for emergency use authorization unless they had at least 2 months of follow-up. So none of these were even evaluated until we had at least 2 months of follow-up, and that was not a number chosen by accident. It's because it's longer than when we know we would normally see more serious adverse effects. And there's not been any signal of any serious adverse effects with these vaccines at all.
All right. Thank you, Amy. Thanks for that overview. That was very informative. So, Dr. Arthur, I'm going to bring you in just to kind of follow up just a little bit more on that. We had a question in the chat box as far as, how long does it take to make more vaccines? We have a manufacturing, a lot of people from our audiences, from the manufacturers, if they need to put out the product, they're just going to hire more people and work overtime. How does that work? And when we talk about the concern, like this came out fast. This was real quick as far as the vaccine coming out, and which has made a lot of people happy, but also made a lot of people concerned. Do we cut corners at all? Was it rushed? Can you elaborate a little bit more on that for safety?
So as far as the manufacturing goes, I'm not really sure exactly what the process is for the mRNA vaccine, but I can say from the clinical trials, I think it's important to realize that this is a once in a lifetime type of event. And quite frankly, that means that we've done things that we haven't done before. The vaccines did go through all the normal phases. We did cheat a little bit. We got a head start. There were similar bugs called MERS and SARS that we've seen years before that we kind of knew this S spike was what we would be going after. So that's part of the delay for some vaccines is finding out what's the best target for things. And then the other part is they kind of fast track the data part instead of taking it nice and slow. They kind of went through that, but it's important to know that they went through all the phases. They did do the safety data. And as Amy had pointed out, they were using 30 to 40,000 patients. So it's not like this was done on 200 or 300 people that would not show those type of side effects moving forward. As far as its availability, some of the availability has been made because, quite frankly, the manufacturers took a lot of risk and started manufacturing it before it was ever approved. So normally they would get approval. They would wait for 6-8 months for the FDA to say, yes, we approve with all your data, and then they would start manufacturing. But as soon as they got their emergency use authorization, there's laws that say that they can't be shipped until it's approved. And as soon as it was approved, millions of doses started to go out to different agencies and to try to get those first vaccinations started. I'm sure Nick can kind of point to this, but primary prevention is probably the best way of dealing with any sort of virus, whether we're talking when it comes to public health, nothing has been proven better than vaccines as far as minimizing healthcare costs and human suffering moving forward. So there was definitely a lot of motivation on this, and I would anticipate that Johnson & Johnson will be the same way. We won't be waiting months for them to manufacturing dose before they start shipping out what they have. They probably have doses already kind of in manufacturing moving forward.
Thanks. So, Dr. Leininger, obviously we're recommending everybody, or it's being recommended to everybody get vaccines, but is there anyone that maybe should not get the vaccine? Maybe somebody that's already had COVID-19 or maybe has it currently. Is there anybody that should not be getting it?
The vast majority of people should get the vaccine. It was not studied in children ages 16 or younger for one of the companies, 18 and younger for one of the other companies. So those studies are still in process. People who were immunosuppressed, who had weakened immune systems for various reasons, they were not included in the studies as well, nor were pregnant women. But in general, all those people should still get the vaccine. The people who are excluded are only those who have a history of severe allergic reaction to any of the components of the COVID vaccines. So that would be anaphylaxis, like your throat closes, you can't breathe, that sort of emergency reaction. The vaccine itself has very few components, so that sort of reaction should be pretty rare. So far, after giving it to about 24 million people in this country, the rate is about 2 to 3 cases per million doses of anaphylaxis that we've seen so far. It's very safe. That reaction is extremely rare. People who have active COVID infection should not get the vaccine, partly just because they're sick and they're infectious and we don't want them coming around a whole bunch of people. They should be quarantining at home. But also because we think the virus itself provides protection for at least 3 months. Beyond that point, people should get the vaccine if they've had COVID before, just because we know that people can get reinfected. I know someone who's had it twice already. Certainly within 6 months, your protection is not perfect. So any benefit we can give, extra protection from the vaccine, is a good thing, just to prevent further illness. The one other small exclusion is that if you've gotten a different vaccine in the past 2 weeks before getting the COVID shot, then you should delay your COVID shot. But otherwise, everyone should get it. We recommend people with weakened immune systems or who are pregnant. You can talk with your caregiver to discuss, your personal situation, but that's not a requirement. We don't want any barriers to help to prevent people from getting the shot and getting that protection that's so important. Okay.
Can you mix and match can you get like your first shot, the Moderna, and then the second shot, Pfizer, or does it have to be in the same family?
It should be the same shot. Just mixing hasn't been studied. They both target the same protein, but it's not exactly the same in terms of the genetic code. Just getting a single dose of either the Pfizer or Moderna vaccines provides pretty good protection, but the best protection is getting the 2 shots. That's where you get to that 95% effectiveness.
Okay. Thank you. Dr. Sabota, one of the questions was, how soon are you protected once you get the vaccine? And if you do receive the vaccine, do you still need to wear a mask? Can you talk through some of that for us?
Absolutely. As already mentioned, there are 2 versions of the vaccine that are commercially available, the Pfizer and Moderna. The Pfizer injection is given, and number 2 is given 3 weeks later. The Moderna vaccine is a 4-week delay for dose number 2. Both are about 90% effective, and it is believed that after 1 month from the first injection from both versions, that a person would be immune. In regard to the question of masking, it absolutely needs to continue. First off, you could be the 1 in 20 that did not develop immunity, and you'd want to be protected in that version. And additionally, I personally have seen over 250 cases myself and have been in rooms with known COVIDs, as many of the other panelists have, and PPE has worked. I've never had the disease myself, and I'm not going to abandon that playbook at this point in time. It's very important to continue on.
Very good. Amy, if as far as from the medical side, when the vaccine was first starting to come out, it seemed like there was a lot of people, even in the medical profession, that were maybe not or resistant to taking the vaccine. Why is that? And are we seeing the trend starting to change a little bit?
Yeah, and so, I think that question speaks to the point that we still have work to do as a healthcare professional. All of us do, and that's why events like today are so important. I applaud everybody who's listening, because what that means is that you're trying to seek out information, that you want to be armed with facts and information to make an informed decision. So, anything that's new is scary. I can tell you that even our own experience here, I have seen multiple people that I know who initially had what we would call vaccine hesitancy. They just weren't quite sure that they wanted to jump on board. And as we've done more education, as we've answered questions, as we've talked to people, I've very much seen that trend start to change. So I think it's incumbent upon all of us, not just panelists, but everybody listening as well, that, if you have friends, loved ones, relatives that aren't certain how they feel about the vaccine, just encourage them to try to get good information and make sure that they are, basing that decision on the best information and on facts. When at all possible. Every time I have someone say to me, I'm just not sure about that vaccine, my response is always, I would love to answer any questions that I possibly can for you. And I think that's why it's important that we're honest about things like side effects. We're not going to tell people, no, there's no side effects, but there's no serious toxicities, and those are two very different things. So the optimist in me believes that this will change over time as more and more people are vaccinated, as we share our experiences. My Facebook feed is full of people getting their COVID vaccines, and that's a good thing. We need to talk about our positive experiences and just encourage people to get good information.
Thank you. Dr. Arthur, we had a question that came in as, can we get COVID from the COVID vaccine? Does that happen? Can it happen?
So with this messenger RNA, not to go into a bunch of biochemistry, but essentially what you're getting is a blueprint for a part. And then you're tricking your body into making that part. There are a couple advantages to this mRNA. Some vaccines, we kind of theoretically like break a leg of a virus and then we give it to you, so hoping that your body will be able to kill it before it can fix its leg. With this messenger RNA, essentially, once it makes the protein, it gets broken down, and so there's kind of a dose limitation to where things are, but you are not getting nearly a full DNA of the virus to mess with. That has advantages and disadvantages. One advantage of it is you cannot get the infection from the vaccine. You will feel like you did, because if your body is being tricked into thinking that cell had been infected by the actual virus, then you would expect to have a fever, you would expect to have soreness and inflammation, and you may have chills and things like that because your body is very upset. The two doses, the first one kind of primes the pump and the second one turns it on. So it's not uncommon for people to get kind of just a sore arm for the first one and a lot more symptoms with the second one. But to my knowledge, there has not been any cases, and theoretically it should not be available for that to cause an infection. The one problem with that is that unlike people that are infected with the actual virus, you only see the S spike. So if something changes in that S spike, we might need to do a different immunization in the future to provide protection if it's too much of a change that the body doesn't recognize it. But for people that have been infected, they'll get the S spike plus multiple other markers that their body may develop antibodies to. As a personal thing, when it comes to this vaccine, I think the important narrative for people to keep in mind is this has been around for 11 months. It's ubiquitous at this point. So I think that some people want to look at this and say, well, what side effects am I going to get from this virus or from this vaccine? And I think the important part is to look at it and say, there are two types of people, either the people that get the live virus or the people that are going to get the vaccine. And so when you compare symptoms, you should be comparing what is it like for those patients I know that have gotten the virus. In my own personal experience, I have a twin brother. He did get COVID. He ended up having blood clots in his lung. He had a lobe of his lung that collapsed, and he was in the hospital for 5 days. I got 2 shots. I had a sore arm after the first one. The second one, I had a little bit of chills and a sore arm. And now I feel completely fine. So I think in the grand scheme of things, I definitely came out on the positive side for that. And I'm 95% sure that I'm safe moving forward. So I think it's important not to just ask what the shot would do to you, but also what the infection would do for you. And I know many of the panelists here have seen multiple people. I know Dr. Leininger and I have seen hundreds of people, and not everybody makes it out of the hospital. And even patients that have made it out of the hospital, I'm seeing over in the office 6-8 months later, they're still having fatigue. They're still having some chronic cough. So even the acute infection is not just 5 or 14 days. It's for some people, it's lasting for months.
That's a good point. Good message. Thanks for sharing. Dr. Leininger, on the new strains are coming out, and which we're hearing about that more and more every day, and which is making people even more anxious. Wondering if the new strain with the vaccines, is it going to be effective for the new strains coming out? Can you talk a little bit about that?
We don't know for sure yet. It does seem like these strains are spreading, and they're starting to find them here in this country as well, with an increased risk for spread. And that makes it more important for us to get the virus as well under control as we can, just because the more the virus spreads, the more chances it has to mutate. These vaccines that we have so far, it seems like they are still effective against the new strains, but maybe a little less than the typical strain that we're seeing around here. It's still better than no protection. And even if they found that the new strain was not protected at all by the vaccines, which is not the case, we think it still works quite well. It still would be good to have protection against the other strains that are out there. It's just like when you're driving a car, just because you have an airbag doesn't mean you don't need to wear a seatbelt too. The more levels of protection you have against all the risks that are out there, the better. So the more we can get the virus under control through vaccination, the better. Because of the technology that's in this mRNA vaccine, it means that they are able to update it. And I think it was Moderna this week that said that they hope to come out with a new booster of it to address any new strains that come out in the future. So as things change, they may be able to adjust. We're learning more about the newer companies' vaccines and seeing how effective they are. It seems kind of similar though in that they're more effective against the most common strain in this country, but less effective against these newer, more easily transmitted strains. But we're still finding out more day by day.
So this booster, in a sense that you just referenced, that could mean maybe we'd have a third shot after you get your first and second shot, then maybe a couple months later you get another shot. And
yeah, it's possible as things change. Like that would be an option. Just if they see that this mRNA protecting us against the spike protein isn't as effective against the new strain, they could give a new genetic code to address the new strains as they come up. So it's possible that we may need more doses, in the future, in the next year or two, as these things are studied and come out, just to make sure we're as protected as possible. But right now, this is what we got. It still works quite well. So, we encourage everyone to get it.
okay, very good. Thank you. Thank you.
And I think another thing to kind of point out is the more native infections that go around the community, the higher the chance of creating these variants are. So if we can stop this going from person to person, every time it goes from person to person, there's a chance that when it replicates, it's going to change the way it makes this S spike. And when you infect however many in the world that have been infected, you're going to eventually get some sort of defect. Just like in our bodies, we eventually will have a defect in replacing cells, and it leads to cancer. So if we can get rid of the virus so that it's not going through hundreds of millions of people, then we decrease the risk of variants kind of popping up and being able to reinfect.
And that also goes back to the importance of still wearing masks masks and distancing and all that sort of thing. And that's where the newer recommendations about wearing 2 masks, just because of the increased transmissibility, we need extra protection to try to make sure we're doing everything we can to slow the spread of these new strains.
Yeah. Thank you. So these are a couple questions that pertain to if you have it. I know we're trying to prevent it with the vaccines, but if you currently have it and how we're dealing with it. Dr. Svoboda, I'd like to bring you back on just to talk about when you should seek medical care. Because sometimes, people, they might have been tested positive and they feel like they have it, they understand it, and sometimes they're reluctant to come in. But when should you seek out medical care?
A good question. Most people are asymptomatic with this, but the things that get people into trouble are the inflammatory components of the COVID-19. First symptom that I'd worry about would be shortness of breath. All of us on the panel have seen folks come into the emergency department, and they've even driven themselves to the hospital and have remarkable hypoxemia or low oxygen levels. That's one of the most dangerous effects of the disease. So absolutely shortness of breath, call your primary doctor. If it's severe, get into the emergency department. Fever is expressed in about 1/3 of the patients with the disease. If you've got an unexplained fever, that'd be a reason to check in with your medical professional. Additionally, about 10% of the patients present with gastrointestinal symptoms. So diarrhea, abdominal cramping would be things to call about if that's unexplained. And lastly, Dr. Arthur referred to this with his twin brother. Thromboembolism or blood clotting can occur with this disorder, with the inflammatory state as well. So anything such as chest pain, swelling, again, back to shortness of breath, these would be the things to call your healthcare professional about.
And if I could add on to Dr. Svoboda, one thing that I've noticed is the normal shortness of breath that we would expect at a given oxygen saturation appears to be messed up in this. So we've had people show up with oxygens in the 60s, which is severely low, and only be slightly short of breath. So especially with my pulmonary patients, I've advised anyone that is infected or think they're infected to get a pulse oximeter. They're about $9 on Amazon, and then watching that saturation. And if they're routinely below 90%, that's a good time to let people know. There are some new biologic therapies, the monoclonal antibodies that are available, that have specific requirements, like they have to be given within 10 days of symptoms and things like that. So if you have tested positive, it might be worth reaching out to your healthcare professional and asking if that would be appropriate for you. If I'm being honest, it's pretty lenient on who can get it. Anyone over 65 with comorbidities is typically on that list.
I agree with Dr. Arthur as well. We've been handing out pulse oximeters, and those things have saved lives. I agree they're inexpensive to get, and maybe the thing that brings you to the hospital before things get worse.
And could you either, Dr. Arthur or Dr. Svoboda, elaborate on the treatments now compared to at the beginning, the therapy treatments as far as treating COVID when they do get it?
Typical inpatient treatment would be derived with antibiotic therapy, concern for superinfection. So azithromycin is a common drug that's given for that. It's a bacterial drug. Steroids are used as well. A drug called dexamethasone, given once daily, can be very effective for the inflammatory phase. And in cases with hypoxemia, there are varying reports, but it's common practice to use remdesivir if the hypoxemia is more severe. It's an HIV drug that allows the virus to perhaps not attach to the cells and prevent further infection. Additionally, various oxygen therapies can be used as the risk obviously expands, and Dr. Arthur can speak to this as well, as the hypoxemia or oxygen demands rise. That indicates a worsening infection.
So I think one of the important things to point out is that there's been a lot of lay press and there's been a lot of scientific literature that has changed over the course of the disease. Things like Plaquenil and convalescent serum and remdesivir. These are all terms that have been kind of thrown out on social media and things like that. I'll make Amy say the monoclonal antibody names because she's been practicing those. But there are now antibodies that we can give to people that nobody can pronounce but Amy, that essentially can decrease your risk of getting that severe disease. So those are for people that don't need oxygen or new onset oxygen, and for people over 65 with less than 10 days of symptoms or over 18 with comorbidities, that can be given within 10 days of symptoms, and it's been shown to decrease hospitalizations and severe infections. So that's a newer therapy that's been derived. A lot of times, to be blunt, the treatment for any virus is slow it down and support the system and let the body make antibodies to clear the infection. And that's a frustrating part from a healthcare provider standpoint, because we do have patients that are in the hospital for 10, 14 days as we're supporting them with a lot more oxygen than they can provide at home, waiting for their body to kind of get that immunity up, because I mean, we may take all the credit, but it's their bodies that are eventually clearing this bug, because none of our stuff actually kills this virus. It just slows it down and lets the body kind of take over.
And this is a question that came in regarding, and it was touched on lightly, the side effects. And whoever would like to answer it, please do. Are they more pronounced after the second dose of the vaccine rather than the first? And if so, can you explain that?
Yes, they are more pronounced after the second dose. I don't know if Dr. Leininger or Amy has received their second dose yet. Did you? You did? Okay. So essentially after that first dose, most of the people that I've talked to and most of the hospital staff, I know 80% of at least 80% of the physician staff at Worcester Community Hospital have been vaccinated with at least one dose. Almost everybody has had a sore arm. The most common thing I've heard is it's similar to a tetanus shot. And that kind of primes the pump. It lets the body know that it's out there. That second dose, people have had some significant symptoms after the first 24 hours. I myself had some, I was fine after the shot. About 12 hours later, I started to develop chills, and I had some body aches and a headache the next day. What I think is important to realize is most of the people I've talked to after 24 to 36 hours, they're completely back to normal. Talking to my brother, those are the same symptoms he had, but he had them for 7 days before he came to the hospital, and then he had them for another 2 weeks after the hospital. So we're tricking the body to think that you've been infected by COVID. So I think, as Amy has alluded to, it's actually a good sign that if that happens, I've actually had some patients that have requested antibodies because they didn't have enough symptoms moving forward, and they were afraid that they didn't get a response to that, because as has been alluded to, you could be that 1 in 20 that doesn't respond to this vaccine, and they wanted to know so that they can get back to travel or seeing their grandkids or whatever.
And I had a similar response. The first dose, my arm was a little bit sore. The second dose, which I got on Tuesday, that evening, I had mild chills. I had a headache. My muscles ached. I had trouble sleeping. But then the next day, I took some Tylenol. I felt basically fine. People who have had COVID infection before, they have that reaction for both doses, just because their body already knows what it's fighting against. Its immune response is already primed to respond to that vaccine when it happens. I've had a few patients who got the shot, had that reaction, but then that reaction continued for about a week or longer, and that's not the vaccine, that's the actual COVID infection. So they just happened to coincidentally get infected with COVID around the time they had the vaccine as well. It wasn't due to the vaccine, but if your symptoms last longer than a day or 2 or 3, you have to worry that maybe something else is going on. You could have the real infection. And we saw this in the trials as well, that for older adults, you aren't quite as able to mount the same immune response. So they had a lower rate of having that same fevers and chills and aches after they got the vaccine. So everyone's going to respond a little bit differently. It's not routine for us to want to get antibody levels to prove immunity. There's more to your body's immune response than just those antibody levels. And not every antibody test will find that anti-spike antibody that the vaccine provides. So just some caveats to thinking about testing to prove immunity.
Yeah, I would, add that universally, if you ask people who have been vaccinated and experience side effects, if they prefer that to COVID infection, I'm pretty sure you're, universally going to get the answer of, I will take 12 or 24 hours of not feeling great over becoming actively infected with COVID every single day of the week. So putting it in perspective, it's much preferable to the alternative. And I want to share Dr. Leininger's line. We had an employee town hall, and it was, such a great line. I was hoping he'd share it, but I'll share with you. When we were discussing the side effects, he pointed out, and I think this is very true, that what we've seen for side effects, the number one side effects we've seen amongst healthcare professionals is overwhelming joy and relief when they receive the COVID vaccine. So that's the number one side effect experienced here for people who have been vaccinated thus far.
Thank you. Dr. Svoboda, have you seen some similar results and similar comments from either your patients or even yourself if you took it twice?
Have heard that from colleagues and patients as well, echoing what the other panelists have mentioned. Personally, didn't have any myself. But again, I think the overarching message here is to get vaccinated and continue the social distancing and the masking. If you've seen what we have seen as healthcare providers, you'd run to the front of that line and get yourself a shot.
Good message. Thank you. Thank you. So one of the questions that came in the chat room, and this might be a Nick question or actually an Amy question, which vaccine is available through Wayne County, through the Wayne County hospitals, or just coming into Wayne County?
I'll take it. The hospitals, the health department, and Mark's Pharmacy have received Moderna to date. Discount Drug Mart has received Pfizer, but that can change. We're pretty much just taking what the state gives us at this point, so that could change. Where one or all of us could start to get Pfizer in addition to Moderna. So a lot of that had to do with the Pfizer, I believe, and maybe Amy knows this better than I do, was primarily used at the beginning with the federal allocation for the nursing homes. And now that the nursing home staff and residents have gotten their second dose, or that may free up some more Pfizer. So I think that's my understanding. And but yeah, primarily Moderna, but I know that Discount Drug Mart has received Pfizer. But
I've commonly been asked if there should be a preference. I get that question a lot. Should I get the Pfizer vaccine or should I get the Moderna vaccine? And my response is always take the first one that somebody will put into your arm. I don't think that we're at any point where we have a preference of one over the other. The answer is take whatever you can get at this point. I personally received Moderna. I would have been happy with any vaccine that I was able to receive.
Thank you. Okay, so once again, as Dr. Svoboda kind of just wrapped up and alluded to, as he mentioned, and I'm seeing this as far as the common theme is get the vaccine, and especially from the frontline workers. And I can't thank you guys enough for everything you've done and everything you've been through, to come on today and talk to us a little bit about it. So I appreciate that. So we do have people that I know are listening. I can see we have attendees to through the site today that are on the webinar, but we have also many that are on the YouTube site as well that we don't see. If there are questions, please submit that either to myself, to Samara at the Worcester Chamber, or Lori from the Orville Chamber. We'd be happy to try to get these answers for you. Some of the questions that came in, which I didn't talk about today, are related to are some legal questions and some HR related questions. if we do get enough of those, we might have maybe a second round if it's important to people, just to talk a little bit about dealing with employees and the vaccine as well. So thank you so much, for today's panel. This was just great information. I'm not an expert in this by any means, so I enjoyed this immensely, just as I'm assuming that the audience did as well. So with that, we are going to sign off, and good luck going forward. And it seems like we're getting close to getting out of this. There's still a grind, and there's still some things that we need to do to continue to work. So but I appreciate all your efforts, and thank you for what you're doing for Wayne County.
Thank you.
Thank you.